My name is Grace Gray. I am 32 years old, and on this afternoon, I was standing under the hot stage lights of my law school graduation. The air smelled of polished wood, perfume, and the faint tang of fresh flowers placed at the ends of each aisle. 1,000 eyes glimmered back at me, the sound of cameras snapping like an endless wave of insects. I told myself that this moment was mine, a milestone carved from 10 years of exhaustion, night shifts, and quiet sacrifices nobody ever recognized. But celebrations in my family have never been safe places. When my name was called, my classmates shouted encouragement, their cheers bouncing against the ceiling. I walked with deliberate steps, my heels hitting the stage, every move rehearsed in my mind. The diploma was only a breath away when the sharp scrape of a chair interrupted everything. My mother, Eleanor Gray, rose from her seat. She wore her signature navy dress, the same shade she often chose when closing deals, as if power had a color, and she owned it. Her face, smooth and controlled, turned toward me and then toward the hall. She lifted her chin and declared, her voice steady enough to echo off the walls, "We are selling the family company." And Grace, you are getting nothing. The words pierced the air. Whispers rippled like wind across tall grass. Parents leaned toward one another. Students glanced from me to her, uncertain if they had misunderstood. My chest felt hollow, yet I stood still, refusing to let my knees buckle under the humiliation she had chosen as her gift on my day of achievement. Then came the applause, not for me, but from my brother Charles. He leaned back in his chair, his laughter curled around each clap, a slow rhythm meant to cut deeper than words. The sight of him, smug and victorious, churned my stomach more than my mother's cruelty. He had always been the golden child, the heir apparent, the one encouraged to take up space while I was pushed into the margins. I swallowed hard, then asked the only question that mattered. "Who is the buyer?" My mother paused, her eyes glittering as though she savored the suspense. "Aurora Group," she said at last. "They are paying $75 million. The hall gasped again, this time at the number. It was dazzling, the kind of figure that made people forgive betrayal and admire ruthlessness. I could feel the audience beginning to side with her, to nod and think perhaps I was too naive, too weak, too unworthy. But patience had been my armor for a decade. I let the silence stretch, let the suspense breathe, my heart beat steady, my voice calm when I answered, "Aurora Group is mine." The words fell into the air with the precision of a blade. A hush devoured the room. The clapping ceased, Charles's hands frozen mid-motion. The grin on his lips collapsed into something brittle. My mother's expression faltered, just for a second, the mask slipping enough for me to glimpse the fear beneath. Every detail sharpened in that silence. The faint hum of the lights, the reflection of the chandelier on the polished floor, the rustle of a gown as someone shifted uncomfortably in the crowd. For the first time in my life, the power was not theirs. It was mine. The quiet after my revelation was almost unbearable. It was the kind of silence that bends the air, stretching each second into eternity. Somewhere in the back row, a glass slipped from a hand and shattered against the floor, the shards scattering like fragments of truth no one wanted to pick up. Charles jerked his head toward me, his smirk erased, his confidence reduced to trembling fury. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the wooden podium. She forced a smile, but her lips twitched at the edges. I knew her performance too well. I had spent my childhood studying that smile, the one she wore when she wanted the world to believe she was unshakable. I recognized the tiny tremor that betrayed her, the invisible crack in the glass facade. I stood still, diploma in one hand, the other resting gently against the fabric of my gown. My calmness was not indifference. It was the armor I had built from years of being dismissed, belittled, and financially cornered. I let the silence speak for me, because sometimes silence is sharper than anger. But if you want to understand how I came to stand there, facing my family in front of strangers, you must go back with me. This moment was not born today. It was the conclusion of a decade of wounds. Our family dining table was the real battlefield. A long mahogany surface polished to a shine, reflecting the chandelier above like a pool of gold. My father, when he was alive, presided at the head with calm authority, balancing Eleanor's sharp edges with steady warmth. When he passed away, the balance was gone. The table became Eleanor's stage and Charles's playground. Meals were no longer about nourishment, but about control. Conversations about the company filled the air, but whenever I dared to contribute, Eleanor cut me off with a wave. "This is business, Grace. You wouldn't understand." Charles's laughter followed. Fork tapping, the sound of casual cruelty. They were rehearsing the script of my erasure in plain sight. And money. That was her favorite weapon. My savings, painstakingly collected from part-time jobs, mysteriously rerouted into family expenses. Loans I never signed appeared under my name, with debts tied neatly around my neck. My accounts dwindled, not by accident, but by her design. Financial abuse is invisible to outsiders. It doesn't bruise the skin, but it shackles your independence. There was one person who noticed. My Aunt Ruth, my father's sister. She had no fortune, no influence, but she had a way of seeing me. After one particularly cruel dinner, she found me in the kitchen, wiping my tears into a dish towel. "They will never offer you a seat at that table," she said quietly, her voice a balm against the sting of rejection. "Stop waiting for one. Build your own." Those words burrowed deep inside me, becoming the seed of something stronger than resentment. Every late night of study, every silent hour in libraries, every careful plan I drew up in notebooks nobody ever saw. Those were the roots of the tree she told me to plant. And now, under the unforgiving spotlight of my graduation, that tree stood tall. The stunned expressions of my mother and brother were not merely a victory. They were proof that I had survived their storm and learned to wield it. The silence in the auditorium did not frighten me. It nourished me. For the first time, I felt what it meant to belong, not because someone handed me a place, but because I had created one. The silence that froze the graduation hall did not appear out of nowhere. It had roots, old and tangled, stretching back to countless nights around a table that looked more like a courtroom than a place for family. That polished mahogany dining table had witnessed my slow erasure long before the world saw it. I can still smell the heavy aroma of rosemary lamb, the clinking of silver forks against china, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. What should have been comforting details of family life only carved the memory deeper. Every seat at that table had meaning. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head, a queen in her fortress, pearls gleaming, lips pressed thin as though every word was a contract clause. To her right, Charles lounged like a prince who had already inherited the crown. His voice carried weight even when his sentences were shallow. And me? I occupied the far end, the edge of both table and conversation. Food might have been served to me, but a share of belonging never was. One evening, I dared to place a folder of charts beside my plate. I had worked late nights on a logistics model, cost reductions, optimized routes, tangible gains. I waited until Eleanor paused to sip her wine, then spoke softly but firmly. If we adjust the Providence distribution routes and stagger the late-night runs, we can cut fuel costs significantly. It could give us leverage with regional carriers. For a moment, I believed she might hear me. Then came the sharp laugh. Charles leaned back, swirling his bourbon with exaggerated flair. "There she goes again, trying to play strategist. Grace, leave the numbers to people who actually matter." The words were not new, but that night they struck deeper. I saw Eleanor glance at me, her gaze cool and polished. She placed her wineglass down with precision and said, "Grace, this company is not the place for experiments. Clients want stability. You should focus on things more fitting for you. Learn how to host dinners properly. It will be more useful than dabbling in contracts." Her tone was not cruel in volume, but it was merciless in effect, a dismissal delivered as if it were maternal advice. The folder never opened. She slid it back. toward me across the table as though it were an unfinished plate. The gesture was simple, almost graceful, but it felt like a door slamming shut. Charles clapped mockingly, as if she had just won a debate on stage. "Bravo, Mother. Maybe Grace can test her little project with a lemonade stand in the backyard." His words drew another round of laughter. From himself alone, because that was all he ever needed. I sat there with heat burning behind my eyes, but I refused to blink. The lamb on my plate grew cold, but my resolve only grew sharper. I did not argue back. I did not plead. Instead, I memorized every expression, every blind spot, every arrogant smirk. They thought I was powerless, but I was learning in silence. The table that night was not about food or family. It was about territory. Eleanor was teaching Charles how to hold power, and I was being taught, without kindness, that I had none. The more invisible they made me, the more determined I became to make myself undeniable. When dinner ended, Eleanor closed the conversation with a soft smile that hid sharper edges. "Grace, I'm glad you are pursuing your studies. Just remember, daughters should bring grace to the home, not disruption to the boardroom." Her words stung more than any direct insult. They were coded in civility, yet soaked in dismissal. I carried my untouched proposal back to my room, the papers smelling faintly of lamb and rejection. Under the dim light of my desk, I spread the charts again, running my fingers over the numbers. They made sense. They were strong. They were real, even if no one at that table acknowledged them. That night, I understood something vital. If I ever wanted a seat at the table, it would not be the one in that dining room. I would have to build one myself, brick by brick, deal by deal, truth by truth. The hush that followed my rejected proposal did not stop at the dining room. It followed me to the bank, the mailbox, and polite conversations that pretended to be care. I went to the neighborhood branch before class, planning to withdraw enough for exam fees and groceries. I slid my card to the teller and waited. Her brow pinched, the printer rattled. A slip appeared with a number that made my stomach drop. Most of the money was gone. The memo line read, "Family Operating Bridge." The authorization block carried an initial that looked like mine, but did not feel like mine. I asked Eleanor for an explanation. She set a teapot between us and called it a harmless timing fix. The company would square up at month end. Month end arrived. The account remained light. When I pressed again, she produced a form with my name and a signature that tried to imitate my hand. The G curled the wrong way. The downstroke bit the page. She said a clerk made a mistake and promised to correct it. Nothing changed. A credit card I had not requested arrived with a limit that matched a semester of tuition. Charges appeared from a Manhattan hotel and a logistics expo during a weekend I spent studying at home. Eleanor said she had registered me to shadow her and the company preferred consolidated billing. My absence did not waive the fee. The statement used my address. The interest meter started ticking. Not every withdrawal wore a letterhead. Payroll from a short internship flowed into a household account for tax convenience. I received an allowance instead of a deposit. An allowance sounds generous. It functions like a leash. Every purchase required justification. Even a subway pass turned into a debate about necessity. I began to search for pattern instead of apology. Transfers posted late at night. Adjustments clustered near quarter close. The same internal extension number appeared on multiple forms. A banker taught me how to obtain a copy of a signature card. A clerk told me to always ask for back pages. Back pages show who initiated what. I stored everything in a binder with stiff covers and hid it behind dull textbooks nobody borrowed. Eleanor shifted tactics when she sensed resistance. She promised to match my savings if I focused on school and kept my head down. I worked extra nights and watched the numbers climb. At quarter's end, the match was reclassified as a family loan to stabilize cash flow. The notation listed me as guarantor. When I objected, she smiled with patient authority and spoke about legacy and sacrifice. Reconciliation would happen at year-end. Year-end passed. Reconciliation did not. Then came the truck. Charles bragged about a new vehicle for weekends at the Cape. The registration listed me as cosigner. A consent page displayed a version of my signature that looked right until I touched the ink and felt grooves the real me never leaves. The dealer said a company officer had provided what was needed. The insurance broker added me to the policy because shared assets require shared responsibility. Premium notices began arriving with late fees. Vendor refunds were routed using my social security number because someone said it was on file from a scholarship form. Small awards I had earned were netted against operating costs without a word. When I objected at dinner, Eleanor kept her tone cool and asked me to stop dramatizing logistics. Consolidation keeps a family strong. I stopped asking for fairness and started building a record. I dated every transfer. I wrote amounts and memo lines. I logged names from phone calls. I learned to hear stress in paper. Clean ledgers read like calm water. Distressed ledgers hiss. I moved modest sums to a credit union that stamped passbooks. I chose an ATM 2 lines away. Distance created privacy. The walk home created plans. The realization arrived quietly while I copied statements at a public library. They were not merely excluding me from decisions. They were extracting value and dressing the extraction as tradition. I could not out-argue that system at the table, but I could outlast it on paper. I opened a folder labeled contingencies and filled it with duplicates and a step plan for the next unauthorized move. It came on a Tuesday. I took the early train, moved what remained into a safe account, and asked the teller to flag any activity that attempted to use my name. On the ride back, winter light struck the river and turned it to steel. I understood a rule that would anchor every choice that followed. Affection without respect becomes a liability. Promises without signatures become debts in disguise. Power without transparency will always ask the quiet person to pay. I decided to stop paying. I would gather proof. I would wait. I would build a door they could not lock and a table they could not move. The night I left Boston was cold, sharp, and merciless, but it felt cleaner than any dinner table argument I had endured. My bag was small. My hands shook as I zipped it, and the sound of the teeth sliding shut echoed through a house that had never felt like home. I counted the contents twice. $2,000 folded in an envelope, a few changes of clothes, a binder of carefully hidden documents, and a notebook I swore would become my map forward. That was all. When Eleanor caught me in the hallway, she did not raise her voice. She leaned against the door frame in her silk robe and whispered as if reading a script she had rehearsed for years. "You will run out of money, Grace. When that happens, you will crawl back. Families forgive. Families control. You will see." The way she said it, calm, cold, certain, stabbed deeper than anger could. I answered nothing. I pressed past her perfume, a mixture of jasmine and iron, and stepped into the night. The bus station smelled of diesel and wet cardboard. I bought a ticket to Chicago with shaking fingers. Boston's skyline blurred as the bus pulled away. I felt both terrified and free. My savings felt like a fortune when I left, but the city devoured it faster than I imagined. Rent for a studio apartment on the south side consumed half of it instantly. The walls of that place were thin, the radiator clanked like a broken metronome, and the single window faced a brick wall stained with rain. I told myself it was a fortress, a seed of independence, even if it was barely larger than a storage room. Food became a ritual of scarcity. Instant noodles stretched across days, mixed with cheap frozen vegetables when sales allowed. I learned which corner markets discounted, produced near closing, and how to carry groceries home in 2 cloth bags that cut into my palms. Hunger taught me discipline. Every bite carried the weight of calculation. At night, I studied financial case law by the dim glow of a desk lamp bought secondhand for $8. My binder of evidence against my family remained hidden beneath the bed, and every time I pulled it out, I reminded myself why the sacrifice mattered. The job at a law firm came by accident, through an ad tacked to the law school bulletin board. It was clerical, bottom rung, nothing. Glamorous, scanning boxes of contracts, sorting files, fetching coffee, yet I inhaled every document I touched. The texture of precedent, the language of settlements, the sharp outlines of liability. These became my secret textbooks. Senior associates tossed me leftovers of research, expecting little. I gave them flawless citations in return. Quiet competence became my currency. Each morning, I walked 30 minutes to the office through wind that sliced my cheeks, carrying my thrift store blazer that was too thin for January. Each evening, I returned with feet sore and notebooks heavy with copied insights. The partners barely knew my name, but the paralegals began slipping me templates and whispered advice, how to read between clauses, how to find leverage hidden in subtext. I listened more than I spoke, and in listening, I learned. There were moments I nearly caved, nights when the radiator stopped, my breath visible in the room. I thought about Eleanor's voice telling me I would crawl back. On paydays, when rent devoured the envelope before I could taste security, I thought about Charles driving the truck registered in my name. Rage smoldered, but so did clarity. I swore never to return empty-handed. Chicago reshaped me. The city's noise disguised my loneliness. Its skyline reminded me that reinvention was possible. On Sundays, I walked by Lake Michigan, watching waves hammer the shore. The water was relentless, patient, inevitable. I began to see myself the same way. Every document I studied, every clause I memorized, every late-night note I scribbled, these were waves gathering force, invisible at first but destined to strike. Eleanor believed absence would weaken me, that scarcity would send me crawling back. Instead, absence became fuel. Scarcity sharpened me. And with every week, every file, every late night at that law firm, I felt myself turning from prey into something far more dangerous. Someone who could wait, watch, and strike when the time came. Boston had been a cage. Chicago, even in its coldest hunger, was freedom. And freedom tasted better than any inheritance. Working at the law firm in Chicago, I discovered more than just the endless stacks of contracts and court filings. I discovered loopholes, cracks in the carefully painted walls of corporations. My job was to review disputes between shareholders and boards. That meant I read everything, from minor shareholder complaints to full-blown lawsuits. It was tedious at first, but over time I noticed a pattern. Small shareholders often felt ignored, their dividends shrinking, their voices silenced. Most of them wanted out, but they lacked buyers. Their frustration was buried inside legal documents that few people cared to read. I cared. The realization hit me like a slow dawn. If someone could gather those ignored voices, give them an exit, it could create leverage. I underlined sentences in case files, highlighted clauses, and scribbled notes late into the night. I knew my family's company was filled with shareholders like these, distant relatives, minor investors, people who had inherited stock but never a say in the boardroom. They were invisible, and invisibility breeds resentment. At first, I told myself I was only curious, but curiosity soon turned into obsession. I started sketching ideas in a notebook, pages filled with diagrams of ownership structures, arrows pointing from weak hands to potential buyers. That's when the name came to me. Aurora. The dawn, the light breaking through the darkness. To anyone else, it was just a pretty word. To me, it was a promise that one day I would rise, quietly, from the shadows where my family had forced me to stay. Creating Aurora Group began with nothing more than paperwork. I filed incorporation documents under an address I could barely afford, listed myself under a pseudonym as director, and set up a separate bank account with the little money I had saved. It wasn't impressive, just a shell, a mask. But that was the point. Masks protect. Masks hide. And Aurora Group would be the perfect mask for me to move without being seen. I remember the first time I saw the logo. I had asked a freelance designer online to create something simple, inexpensive. She sent back 3 drafts. The third was a rising sun with sharp, clean lines, breaking above a horizon. It was bold, modern, unassuming. I stared at it for a long time before deciding. That was it. That was Aurora. I printed it out and pinned it on the wall of my tiny apartment. Every morning as I sipped bitter instant coffee, I looked at it and reminded myself, patience. Because this wasn't about striking immediately. Not yet. I needed to prepare, to understand every angle. I spent nights reading securities law, memorizing the difference between voting and non-voting shares, tracing the rights of minority stakeholders. I haunted online forums where frustrated investors vented, cataloging names and numbers. It was like gathering whispers in a crowded room, each one small, but together they formed a chorus. My colleagues at the law firm thought I was just another overworked associate burning the midnight oil. They didn't know that while I was drafting contracts for clients, I was also drafting the future for myself. Quietly, steadily, I was laying the foundation. Aurora Group was not yet powerful. It had no assets, no prestige, no story. But it had intent, and intent can be stronger than wealth when carried by the right person. Sometimes in moments of fatigue, I would hear my mother's cold words echo in my mind. "Grace, you're getting nothing?" Those words stung, but they also fueled me. They became a refrain, pushing me to keep going. And in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by textbooks, scribbled notes, and that one printout of the Aurora logo, I began to believe that nothing could become everything. This was not revenge yet. It was preparation. It was a seed planted in rocky soil, invisible to anyone else. But I knew seeds have a way of breaking through. Aurora Group was born in the shadows, but one day it would step into the light. And when it did, the people who had dismissed me at the family dinner table would no longer be able to ignore me. Aurora Group existed only on paper at first, but I knew it had to become more than a name. To turn it into a weapon, I needed ownership. Real, measurable influence. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. At the law firm, I handled a case involving a minor shareholder who had grown tired of the endless politics inside a manufacturing company. He wanted out. Fast. He didn't care about profit, he wanted freedom. That conversation stuck with me because I realized my family's company had dozens of shareholders just like him. People with 10, maybe 20 shares. Not enough to matter alone, but powerful when gathered together. So I began my hunt. I contacted them quietly, one by one. I never revealed my real name. Instead, I used Aurora Group as the buyer, presenting it as a neutral investment fund. I hired a broker to stand between me and the deals, paying him a percentage just so no one would ever suspect my identity. Each time I heard a shareholder's weary voice agree to sell, I felt a spark of electricity shoot through me. But with every signature, my heart also pounded harder. If anyone traced these moves back to me, everything would collapse before it even began. The first contract was for only a handful of shares. I remember holding the document in my shaking hands, staring at the ink as it dried. It felt surreal, like I had stolen a secret from under my mother's nose. The paper crackled when I folded it into the folder, as if whispering that the game had truly begun. I did not stop there. Over the next months, I worked like a shadow, finding frustrated investors in forgotten corners of the shareholder registry. Some were elderly widows who had inherited stock, but never dividends. Others were businessmen who had given up on waiting for returns. Many were suspicious at first, but once they saw money transferred quickly, their doubts vanished. Aurora Group gained piece after piece of the puzzle, small slivers of power that together began to form something meaningful. Every acquisition felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. I rehearsed conversations in my head before each call, my palms damp with sweat. I signed contracts late at night in my cramped apartment. My desk covered in folders and sticky notes, I double-checked every bank transfer, terrified a single mistake would expose me. Sometimes I thought I heard echoes of my brother's laughter, mocking me, daring me to fail. But I never allowed myself to stop. One evening, after securing another small block of shares, I stared at the updated chart of ownership I had pinned on my wall. Red markers showed the shares still out of reach. Blue markers showed the ones already under Aurora's control. Slowly, the board was changing color. It was still far from enough to challenge my family, but it was progress. For the first time in years, I felt the balance of power begin to shift. There was danger in every step. Brokers asked questions I had to deflect with calm lies. Lawyers looked twice at the contracts, wondering why an unknown fund cared so much about these forgotten shares. I hid behind layers of paperwork, fake directors, and rented office addresses. Each time I filed a document, I prayed no one would pull the thread. And yet, with every risk came reward. Each acquisition was a victory whispered in silence. I celebrated alone, pouring cheap wine into a chipped glass, raising it toward the Aurora logo pinned above my desk. That logo had become my compass, a reminder that all this fear, all this secrecy, was leading somewhere brighter. The most terrifying moment came when one seller insisted on meeting face to face. He was a middle-aged accountant, skeptical about the fund. My broker arranged the meeting in a crowded cafe. I wore plain clothes, sat in the corner, and spoke as little as possible. My heart thudded so loudly I thought he might hear it. When he finally signed and slid the papers across the table, relief washed over me like a wave. I excused myself quickly, clutching the folder under my arm as if it were my lifeline. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, my knees trembling. That day, I realized something important. This wasn't only about shares, it was about nerve. Each step demanded courage I never knew I had. My family had dismissed me as weak, as someone destined to fade into the background. But now I was proving, even to myself, that I could take risks, endure pressure, and survive. Aurora Group was no longer just a mask. It was becoming a force, silent but unstoppable. The acquisitions were small, almost invisible to anyone not looking closely. But I knew that even the smallest drops of water could carve stone. I was carving slowly, carefully, dangerously. And though I walked the edge of disaster with every signature, I felt alive in a way I never had before. The months of hidden acquisitions had sharpened my focus, but nothing prepared me for the day I saw them again. It happened at a logistics conference downtown. My firm had been invited and my boss insisted I attend. I almost declined, fearing the risk of exposure, but something deep inside told me to go. Perhaps fate had set the stage. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and hushed conversations. Banners hung overhead, boasting words like innovation, efficiency, and next generation. I found a seat near the back, keeping my posture low, almost invisible. My heart slowed, then pounded again when the announcer introduced the next speakers, Eleanor Gray and Charles Gray, my mother and my brother. They walked onto the stage like royalty. My mother's pearl necklace gleamed beneath the lights, her smile rehearsed and commanding. Charles followed, his stride filled with arrogance, the smirk I knew too well etched across his face. They stood behind the podium, speaking with confidence, as though the empire was already theirs to inherit. I listened as Eleanor praised Charles, calling him the future of Gray Enterprises. She spoke of his discipline and vision, words she had never once offered me. The crowd clapped politely, nodding in approval, believing the performance. I sat still, a stone among ripples, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Charles leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with triumph. He boasted about upcoming expansions, about how the company was positioning itself as the leader of a new era. He thanked the audience for trusting the Gray legacy. Then he paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room like a conqueror inspecting his domain. For a fleeting second, his eyes brushed past me, but he did not recognize the woman I had become. The words pierced, but not like they once had. Instead of feeling excluded, I felt fueled. Every sentence they spoke became fuel for the fire I had carried since leaving home. Their arrogance confirmed what I already knew. They had no idea what storm was building right beneath their feet. I reached for my glass of water, watching my hand tremble slightly. I wasn't trembling from fear. It was anticipation. My mind played the scene forward. Aurora Group entering the stage, shattering their illusion of control. I could almost hear the silence that would follow, the disbelief in their voices when they realized the truth. After their presentation, applause filled the hall. My mother bowed her head gracefully. Charles raised his hand like a champion. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes. They basked in the glow of attention, blind to the shadows creeping around them. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Not the smile of victory. Not yet, but of inevitability. I leaned toward the empty chair beside me and whispered under my breath, "Wait. Aurora is coming." That phrase lingered in the air, unheard by anyone but me. It tasted sweet, like a secret too delicious to share. For the first time, I felt no need to shout, no need to prove myself to this crowd. The real proof was already in motion, sealed with contracts and hidden signatures. As I left the ballroom, the heavy doors closed behind me with a hollow thud, like the toll of a distant bell. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. I paused on the steps, staring at the city lights stretched before me. Somewhere in those towers, Aurora Group already existed, waiting to rise. In that moment, I realized something crucial. This fight was no longer about validation, it was about destiny. My mother and brother could stand on as many stages as they wanted, painting their story for the world. Soon enough, the truth would paint itself. And when it did, no stage, no spotlight, no applause would be enough to protect them. I turned away from the conference hall, walking steadily into the night. Each step echoed with quiet resolve. Their vision of succession had been declared, but mine was already unfolding. The confrontation was not today nor tomorrow, but it was inevitable. Every heartbeat, every breath, every calculated move brought me closer. And though the city around me hummed with life, I carried silence inside. A silence sharp as steel, a silence ready to strike. The night after the logistics conference, I couldn't sleep. The image of my mother and brother standing proudly beneath the bright chandeliers haunted me. Their words still echoed, a performance designed to cement Charles as the heir and erase me completely. Yet beneath that show, I knew the truth. Their foundation was already cracking. Aurora Group was the chisel, and I was the hand holding it. But as powerful as the thought was, a weight pressed against my chest. This was no longer a question of business. This was family. And family, no matter how cruel, carried chains thicker than iron. The next evening, I met Isabella at a quiet cafe tucked between narrow streets. She had been with me since the early Chicago days when I survived on instant noodles and secondhand hope. Her loyalty was fierce, but so was her honesty. She sipped her coffee slowly, studying me with eyes that had seen every stage of my struggle. "Grace," she said, lowering her voice, "are you sure about this? Going back means opening old wounds. What if the cost is more than you're ready to pay?" I didn't answer right away. The noise of the cafe surrounded us, clinking cups, murmurs of strangers, the faint hiss of steam from the espresso machine. I wanted to tell her that this was only about reclaiming what was stolen, about justice, about proving I wasn't weak, but deep inside, I knew her words carried weight. "They already abandoned me, Isabella," I whispered. "They took everything, my inheritance, my savings, even my dignity. What family does that? If I walk away now, I let them win again." She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. Sometimes winning doesn't mean fighting. Sometimes it means building your own peace somewhere far away. What if revenge destroys the part of you I fought so hard to protect? Her concern pierced me. Isabella had patched the holes left in me during those lean years. She had carried groceries when I couldn't afford them, stayed up late while I studied case law, reminded me of my worth when my mother's voice tried to erase it. Now she was asking me to reconsider. "I can't turn away," I said firmly, though my throat tightened. "If I don't face them, I'll carry this shadow forever. I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if justice was within reach, but I was too afraid to grasp it." Her eyes softened, but pain lingered in them. She nodded, conceding, though not agreeing. "Just promise me one thing. Don't lose yourself in the fight. You're not your mother, Grace. You're not Charles. You're better." Her words followed me like a prayer as I left the cafe. That night, I drove to Aunt Ruth's home. Her house smelled of lavender and old wood, the same comfort I remembered as a child. She had been the only steady warmth when my father passed, the only one who reminded me I was more than a daughter pushed aside. She welcomed me with a gentle hug, no questions asked. In her living room, with the soft crackle of a fireplace, I finally let my armor slip. "Ruth," I said quietly, "I'm about to step into a storm. I don't know if I'll come out whole." She studied me for a moment, her gaze both tender and piercing. "You've carried storms before, Grace. This one is no different. But tell me, what are you afraid of losing?" I hesitated. The answer was simple, but hard to admit. "Myself. I'm afraid that when this is over, I won't recognize the person who survives." Ruth placed her hand over mine, her voice steady. "Justice is never painless, child. It strips us, tests us, sometimes breaks us. But there is a difference between pain and corruption. You can endure one without surrendering to the other." Her words seeped into me like warm rain. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a pawn in my mother's game, not as a rival to my brother, but as Grace, a woman who had suffered and endured. "You deserve justice," Ruth continued. "Not because of what they took from you, but because of who you are. The world will not hand it to you, so you must claim it. But when you do, remember, victory is not revenge. Victory is freedom." Tears stung my eyes, unbidden but cleansing. I leaned into her embrace, allowing myself a moment of vulnerability. In that quiet living room, with the fire's glow painting shadows across the walls, I understood that this battle was not simply for wealth or recognition. It was for the restoration of my own soul. When I finally stood to leave, Ruth pressed a small silver pendant into my hand. It was simple, etched with the faint image of an aurora across its surface. "Carry this with you," she said softly. "When the weight feels too heavy, let it remind you that light always returns, even after the darkest nights." As I stepped back into the cold evening, pendant in hand, Isabella's caution and Ruth's wisdom collided in my heart. One urged me to retreat, the other urged me to advance. The choice was mine. And though the path ahead terrified me, I knew where I was headed. The return was no longer a question of if, but when. The silver pendant from Ruth sat warm in my palm as Isabella's warning kept time. "Do not lose yourself." Back in my apartment, I set it on the dresser and switched on the lamp. I opened the closet and faced the question I had avoided. Who should they meet when I returned to Boston? The answer waited in. Garment bags earned one invoice at a time. I unzipped the first, a tailored charcoal suit with a quiet sheen and stitching that felt like conviction. Beside it hung an ivory blouse, crisp as a contract. Below, black pumps that would not ask for mercy. I laid them on the bed and added a navy sheath dress for necessary dinners. Next came logistics, the suitcase yawning on the floor, its wheels scuffed by Chicago sidewalks. I folded clothing with the care I once reserved for evidence. Socks nested in shoes, collars aligned, the pendant slipped into a felt pouch. I tucked in the graduation cap and pressed gown. Whatever else happened, I would walk that stage on my terms. Preparation was not only fabric. I powered up the laptop and checked the folders that mattered. The term sheet sat in a protected archive. The purchase agreement had been scrubbed by outside counsel, who knew only the fund, not the woman behind it. Escrow instructions were final, wire confirmations printed, a closing calendar set for the morning after the ceremony. I reviewed every signature. Mine appeared nowhere. I called the broker on the secure line. He confirmed the last minor sellers. The stack was modest, but enough to amplify Aurora's bid. He would attend the closing as the fund's face. I would be listed as special counsel under a pseudonym. We rehearsed briefly. Short answers, no stray details. Before shutting the lid, I typed 3 sentences I might need on stage if the moment came. Not a speech, a scalpel. I printed the page and slid it behind my diploma case. The paper hissed faintly, as if warning that once spoken, certain truths cannot be recalled. In the bathroom mirror, a different woman looked back. I pulled my hair into a low knot. Simple, deliberate. Makeup stayed minimal, clean lines, steady hand. I clasped the pendant and felt its cool arc at my collarbone. Light after darkness, promise before proof. I breathed until my pulse slowed to the clock. I wheeled the suitcase to the door. Above the desk, the Aurora logo caught a blade of streetlight. The rising arc seemed in motion. I remembered the first night I taped it there. Now it felt like a standard raised for a campaign. Isabella texted, "Did I need a ride at dawn?" I replied that a car was booked. She sent a heart. The broker messaged next, all green. Ruth's blessing arrived last and eased something in my chest. At first light, I dressed without hesitation. The suit settled like armor, the shoes gripped with purpose. I locked the door and listened to the tumblers click, a ritual of leaving that felt like a vow. Outside, the air smelled of coffee and wet concrete. The rideshare slid to the curb. The driver said nothing, which was perfect. Glass towers drifted by as we crossed the river. I watched my reflection in the window, a figure of edges carrying a secret that would alter a family and a company. The airport buzzed with ordinary goodbyes. At security, I placed the laptop and diploma case in separate trays. The pendant stayed against my skin. At the gate, I faced the runway. Jets rose and fell in measured arcs. Timing mattered. Weight mattered. I reviewed the closing schedule and pictured the room where signatures would stack like bricks. If the ceremony gave them a stage, the closing would give me the ground beneath it. I was not going home to beg. I was going to finish what I had started. When boarding was called, I lifted the suitcase. Its wheels hummed across the tile, and unbroken. I walked down the jet bridge with the Aurora logo bright in my mind, and one intention tightening like a knot. When they spoke about legacy, I would answer with ownership. The echo of applause had barely faded when Charles cornered me in the narrow hallway behind the stage. His jaw tightened, his fists flexed at his sides, and his voice came out as a low growl that trembled with barely restrained fury. "You ruined everything. You think you are clever, standing there and smiling while the company slips from our hands. You humiliated mother, humiliated me. Do you know what you have done?" His face flushed crimson, veins rising along his temples, every word dripping with venom. I looked at him, not flinching, letting the silence hold long enough for the tension to stretch like glass ready to shatter. Then I answered with calm precision. "What I have done is nothing compared to what you already did." He sneered, shoving a finger toward my chest. "You have always been jealous. You wanted the spotlight, but you never earned it. You walked away, left us to build, and now you swoop back in pretending you are some savior. You betrayed us, Grace. You betrayed me." I slid a thin folder from my bag and opened it slowly. Inside were the bank statements and contracts, neatly clipped together. I placed them in his hands, my voice steady but edged with steel. "Look again, Charles. You want to talk about betrayal? Here's $200,000 you siphoned from the company accounts. You called it consulting expenses. I call it theft." His fingers trembled as he scanned the pages. His lips parted, but no words came out. For a moment, the mask of superiority cracked, and underneath it was raw panic. Then he tried to recover, tearing the papers in half and throwing the scraps onto the floor. "Lies. You forged these. You think anyone will believe you? Mother knows where her loyalty is. She will stand with me, not you." I stooped and picked up a fragment of the paper, holding it between us like evidence in a courtroom. "These aren't lies. They are certified, Charles, stamped and notarized. You are not the victim in this story. You are the thief." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. His breath was hot against my ear as he hissed, "You do not belong here. This family, this company, everything, it's mine. You think you can embarrass me in front of investors? You think Aurora makes you powerful? You will never be one of us." I pulled free, straightened my jacket, and looked him dead in the eye. "I don't need to be one of you. Aurora is mine because I built it. You can keep pretending you are a leader, but you know the truth. Without Mother's favoritism, you are nothing. Without the company money, you are nothing. And soon, everyone will see it." The air around us thickened, charged with the weight of years of rivalry and resentment. Charles's rage boiled over. He kicked the wall so hard, the sound echoed down the hallway. "You will regret this, Grace. I swear you will." Students passing by slowed, staring, whispering. Some shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones, recording the scene as if sensing history in the making. Charles, once polished and untouchable, looked cornered and feral. I, once the invisible daughter, stood unshaken. He stormed off, shoving anyone in his way, muttering curses under his breath. I stayed behind, breathing slowly, the shredded papers still scattered like fallen leaves around my feet. For years, I had been silent at the dinner table, excluded from conversations, treated as if my ideas carried no weight. Now, standing in that hallway, I realized silence was no longer my burden. It was his. The fallout was immediate. Some family friends whispered that I was cruel, exposing him publicly. Others said I had been too patient, that justice was overdue. Lines began to form, some siding with Charles out of habit, others quietly leaning toward me. The question hung heavy in the air, unresolved and biting. Was I the cold daughter seeking revenge, or was I the only one willing to name the truth? I knew the debate would rage long after this night, but I also knew something far more dangerous. Charles had been unmasked, and unmasked men are unpredictable. The confrontation was only the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and I had declared, without apology, that I would no longer be the one erased. I found her office door locked, a sliver of light cutting under the threshold. Voices leaked through, clipped, urgent, legal. I knocked once. Silence. I knocked again. The latch clicked, and Eleanor appeared with the phone pressed to her ear, pearls askew, mascara smudged. She tried to shut me out. I held the door with my palm and stepped inside. Perfume hung in the air over the dry smell of paper and leather. Folders crowded the desk. Some were open, tabbed, ink bleeding through flags. She waved the call to speaker. "Stay on the line," she ordered. A male voice recited options, injunctions, reputational triage. My mother's hand trembled as she gripped a file labeled "Closing." "You will unwind this," she said. "You will withdraw the offer. You will apologize publicly." She tried to square her shoulders. "No," I said. "The contracts are executed, the board consented, escrow is ready, your lawyers know it." The speaker crackled. "Ms. Gray, the transaction appears binding on preliminary review. A challenge risks publicity and liability." Eleanor stabbed the button, cutting him off. "He is cautious, not correct." Her voice rose. "You did this to humiliate me. You paraded our private affairs on your graduation day." "I stated a fact," I answered. "The humiliation grew here behind this desk." Her mouth pinched. She slammed the file. "You betrayed the family." The room tightened around that sentence. I kept my hands low so she would not see them shake. "You betrayed me first." Her eyes flashed. "I clothed you, I paid for tutors, I kept the company alive. You also drained my accounts, signed my name to loans, and told me to smile while you erased me." I moved closer. "This is not revenge. This is accountability." She lifted the phone again. "I will call the press. I will define the narrative before you poison it." "Do," I said. "Tell them a fund acquired a struggling firm at a fair price. Tell them nothing about the daughter you taught to be silent." I paused. "Or tell them everything and invite questions you cannot answer." Her breath hitched. She set a crystal paperweight down too hard. "You were supposed to support your brother. He is the heir." "He is an adult who can stand or fall on his actions," I replied. "Right now, he is falling." "He is loyal," she snapped. "He is expensive." I pulled a single page from my folder, not the embezzlement file from the hallway, a ledger showing company-paid personal expenses. Boat fuel, club dues, unreported travel. Those numbers do not spell loyalty. She stared at the columns and refused to read them. "You are cruel." "I am careful." I replaced the page and closed the folder. "And I am done pretending that carelessness deserves another chance." For a moment, she said nothing. The office clock beat a slow, surgical rhythm. When she spoke again, her tone softened. "I wanted security for this family. I chose the child strong enough to carry it. You chose the child who reflected you, I said, and you chose me only as decoration for a story I never agreed to. Her shoulders sagged. She reached for a photo of my father and touched the glass. Your father would not have allowed this. He taught me to read the fine print, I answered. And to finish what I start? The speakerphone lit up. Her attorney called back. She ignored it. If I accept this sale, what becomes of me? You become emeritus, I said evenly. Advisory, visible, not in control. You keep your dignity if you choose it. She laughed once, without humor. You took my sword and offer me a trophy. I offer you a chair at a different table. A pause opened. Small, fragile, real. The phone kept ringing. The perfume seemed less sharp. I will not bless you, she said. I did not ask for blessing, I replied. I asked for truth, and the truth is, signed. Her hand hovered over the receiver, then fell. Get out! I nodded, turned, and reached the doorway. Her voice followed, quieter than I had ever heard it. Grace. I looked back. Was there any path where you stayed? I let the question live between us. Yes, I said. The one where you saw me. Then I closed the door, leaving the perfume and the paper and the history to settle without me. Outside, the corridor felt colder than before, as if the building exhaled our argument into night. The house was quiet when she asked me to come back. No audience, no lawyers, no stage. Just a mother and a daughter, and the walls that had heard everything but never spoken. Her office looked smaller than before, stripped of the armor she once wore with such ease. The curtains were half drawn. A muted afternoon light cut across the floor. She sat behind the desk with a photograph of my father already in her hands. Jonathan Gray, the man whose absence had carved a canyon through us. She traced his outline with a fingertip, her rings glinting faintly. Her lips parted, but for once words did not rush out in command or scorn. They faltered, cracked, broke. I was blind, she whispered. The sound carried less like a confession and more like a surrender. I wanted to preserve what your father built, and in that desperation, I convinced myself Charles was the only heir. I thought the name, the bloodline, the son, it all had to continue through him. She inhaled sharply, as though the memory itself stabbed. I ignored you. I silenced you. I emptied your accounts, and I told myself it was temporary. I thought one day you would forgive me because you were the stronger one. But strength is not an excuse for cruelty. Her shoulders trembled. She lifted the photo closer, clutching it like a shield. Jonathan, forgive me, she murmured to glass and wood. Her tears landed on the frame, streaking the image of the man who once steadied both of us. Her other hand reached out into the empty air between us, hesitant, frail. I did not move forward. I did not retreat. I let silence stretch, not as punishment, but as the only language strong enough to hold what was happening. She looked at me, expecting reproach or vindication. I offered neither. Only stillness, eyes steady, hands folded. That silence was weight. It was reminder, consequence, mirror. And in it, she saw herself. Her sobs filled the room, not loud, but deep, coming from a place she had locked for decades. For the first time, she was not the matriarch, the executive, the gatekeeper of inheritance. She was a woman, grieving her own blindness, asking for a daughter's gaze to hold her steady. I did not speak. Words would have diluted what was already clear. My silence carried more power than accusation ever could. It told her she was finally seen, stripped of defenses, forced to face the truth she had long denied. Her tears kept falling. She pressed the photo to her chest as if Jonathan could absorb her regrets, as if his memory could mediate between us. Her breath shuddered, uneven. When she finally lowered the frame, her eyes, red, swollen, raw, met mine. I failed you, she said. I blinked, but I did not reply. My silence was not absence. It was presence. It was a refusal to make her confession easier by rushing to absolve or condemn. It was strength dressed in restraint, and in that space, she understood more than any speech could have delivered. The next morning, she summoned me again. No trembling this time. Her tears had dried, leaving behind lines of fatigue, but also clarity. She wore black, simple, without pearls or pretense. On the desk lay no lawyer's folders, no contracts, just a single notepad with her handwriting across the top. "You hold the company now," she began. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "But I cannot let the gray name vanish, not after everything Jonathan built." I leaned forward, measured, controlled. It will not vanish. Gray Logistics remains. Gray Logistics. The name endures. Her eyes lifted, cautious, searching for a condition. I gave it to her. But there must be terms. I spread my own folder open and slid it across. "First, you remain as senior advisor. Not in control, not issuing decrees, but present. Your knowledge matters, even if your decisions have wounded." She nodded slowly, relief flickering. "Second, Charles steps down permanently. No executive role, no shadow influence. He can live his life without titles he never earned." Her throat tightened, but she did not argue. A mother's instinct to protect flickered, but it was tempered now by the memory of her son's embezzlement and arrogance. "Third," I continued, "transparency becomes non-negotiable. Every ledger, every contract, every signature passes through scrutiny. No more secrets carved out in quiet corners." For a long time, she said nothing. She stared at the notepad, at the words she had scribbled before I arrived. Then she lifted her head, and I saw it, the acceptance, bitter yet genuine. She whispered, "You are merciful in ways I do not deserve." I kept my gaze even. Mercy is not softness, it is structure. Without it, there is chaos. With it, there is balance. Her hand shook as she reached for the pen. She signed the conditions, each stroke deliberate, like carving a new truth into the world. When she finished, she closed her eyes, inhaling sharply, as though the weight of decades slipped from her lungs. Tears welled again, but these were different. Not rage, not denial, not fear. They were tears of recognition, of her daughter's strength, of her own failure, of the fragile bridge we had built. She bowed her head, shoulders trembling. I said nothing for a moment, letting her grief and surrender ripple through the silence. Then, softly, I added, "This is not erasure. This is correction. The gray name will endure, but it will endure differently." Her sob broke into a laugh, jagged, astonished. "Jonathan would have called you ruthless," she said. "Jonathan would have called me prepared," I answered. She reached across the desk, her palm open, trembling, waiting. I considered it, long enough for the air to thicken, then I placed my hand lightly over hers. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was something neither of us had offered before. Acknowledgement without disguise. That gesture, small as it was, carried the echo the audience needed to feel. Forgiveness touched with bitterness, compassion mixed with consequence. My mercy was not sentimental. It was deliberate, firm, and laced with the knowledge that what was broken could not return to what it once was. She wept quietly, clutching both the pen and my hand. And in that mingling of salt and ink, the motif closed, the mother's repentance fragile and human, under the gaze of the daughter she had once denied. 1 year passed, and the world looked unrecognizable compared to the storm that had nearly destroyed me. The name on the tall glass building no longer bore the mark of arrogance or exclusion. It carried a new identity, Aurora Gray Transport. The unveiling ceremony was more than corporate rebranding. It was the stitching together of broken lineage with a thread of rebirth. The banners draped across the entrance shimmered under the spring sun, blue and silver woven together like light and steel. Employees gathered with cautious hope. Journalists scribbled notes, and cameras captured every angle. My heels echoed against the marble floor as I walked to the podium, the Aurora star now fused with the gray crest behind me. This was no longer about revenge. It was legacy reconstructed, one brick at a time. Charles sat in the front row, not as an executive, but as a student of humility. He had enrolled in a management program at a university far from Boston. The same boy who once mocked my voice at the dinner table now took notes from professors who cared little for his surname. Our relationship was fragile, tentative, but his presence that day showed willingness to start again. My mother, Eleanor, stood nearby, dressed in understated gray silk, a pin of the new logo at her collar. She was no longer the matriarch issuing decrees. She had founded a charitable foundation supporting women who had endured financial abuse, the very cruelty she once inflicted on me. Each donation, she announced, carried a silent apology, every scholarship an unspoken vow. She had become living proof that redemption was not an abstract idea, but a deliberate practice. And then there was Aunt Ruth. She arrived with her steady gait, carrying no title, no wealth, but more dignity than any executive in that room. When she took her seat, her eyes found mine, and she smiled. A smile that belonged not to the company nor to the press, but to the girl she had once sheltered with wisdom and warmth. That smile told me everything. Pride, relief, and quiet recognition that the scars had not been in vain. As the speeches concluded, I invited everyone to a banquet set, not in a gilded hall, but in a renovated warehouse, the very first space where Jonathan Gray had once dreamed of logistics made simple. The tables stretched in long rows, workers seated beside managers, laughter weaving through conversations. And as I stood at the head of the table, I could not help but remember the dinners of the past, those long nights where my voice had been silenced, my presence minimized, my seat pushed to the margins. But now the motif of the dining table had been rewritten. Instead of dismissal, there was inclusion. Instead of cold dismissal, there was shared bread, poured wine, clinking glasses. Eleanor lifted her glass in a modest toast, her eyes glistening, and for the first time her words did not wound. They healed. Aurora Gray, she said softly, stands because Grace believed when I did not. Today we eat together, as equals. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but warm, rolling through the room like steady waves. It was not triumph as spectacle. It was triumph as communion. I raised my glass too, letting the echo of voices remind me that the story had found its next chapter. And in that moment, with candles glowing across the long table, I felt the closure of one cycle and the opening of another. The table no longer symbolized betrayal. It had become the place where new promises were written. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the city hummed beyond my window, I returned to solitude. My apartment was no longer bare, no longer haunted by unpaid bills or empty cupboards. Yet I kept it simple, a space that reminded me of the path I had walked. I brewed a cup of tea and carried it to the chair by the window. The steam rose gently, curling into the air as though it carried the voices of the past. I looked out at the skyline, at the tower now bearing the Aurora Gray name, glowing against the night. And then, faintly, the memory replayed itself. The graduation stage. The crowd hushed, my mother's announcement slicing through the air, my brother's applause, and then my own voice, steady, sharp, inevitable. Mom, Aurora Group is mine. The line still reverberated in me, not with bitterness, but with power reclaimed. I sipped the tea, the warmth grounding me in the present. My eyes drifted to the wall where the Aurora logo had been framed, its silver outline catching the moonlight. The star within it seemed alive, a constant reminder of transformation, not erasure of pain, but renewal forged through it. The room was quiet, but it was not emptiness. It was peace earned through battles no one else could fight for me. I thought of Isabella's caution, Ruth's encouragement, my mother's trembling confession, and Charles's reluctant bow to accountability. Each voice had shaped the path. Each silence had carved its own truth. I let the silence hold me once again, just as it had in the moment of my mother's confession. There was strength in not filling the air, strength in allowing space for memory, grief, and gratitude to coexist. As the first light of dawn began to bleed into the horizon, I placed the empty cup on the table. The aurora star on the wall caught that new light, refracting it into the room. Symbolic closure. Simple, yet undeniable. The light that once felt distant now lived here, within reach, within me. The story was not about victory alone. It was about carrying scars without letting them dictate the future. It was about sitting with echoes and choosing not to drown in them. And so, before I closed my eyes that night, I thought of the countless strangers who might one day hear my story. People across the world, sipping their coffee at dawn or listening late into the night, finding in it a mirror of their own wounds. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. The light spread wider across the room. I smiled faintly, whispered to the silence, "Take care." And with that, I let the story rest, not with finality, but with an aftertaste that lingered, like tea cooling in porcelain, like light waiting for the next dawn.